Hi again then guys, and of course welcome to yet another car review from GT Sport 1.53, and as I alluded to in my overarching thoughts for this update on the day that it dropped, this was the car that pleasantly surprised me the most, because I had no expectations for it either way. Now, I'm not hugely into the Japanese sedan and luxury car scene. JDM, of course I am to some degree, but these kind of Japanese only or Asian only vehicles are a bit of a hole in my knowledge, actually, and that's not necessarily something that I plan on changing anytime soon because it doesn't really affect the channel that much, but it is certainly a fascinating group of vehicles in general, and I'm surprised actually with the amount of parallels that you can see between vehicles like this, for instance, and many of the American market Asian vehicles, stuff like your big Acuras and the larger Toyota models and even others too, the Genesis brand coming out of Hyundai, Lexus coming from Toyota, Infiniti coming from Nissan. There are definitely a lot of parallels there. Around 3.5 litres, it's again very similar to what you'd see in the American equivalent of a car like this. Now, there are certainly reasons for that, marketing, various others too, but in terms of what this car can do, it's very impressive. I will just straight up say that. This is a car which, if you weren't expecting it and didn't have any hopes for it, as I didn't, then it will pleasantly surprise you in one way or another. On the other hand though, if you were hoping for some Asian region vehicles like this, not just JDM but more specifically Asian than that, such as this, then you're definitely going to love it, because this car isn't just a big sedan for the sake of having one in the game. Some people would probably argue that this is more useful, in fact, than the Porsche Taycan was, despite the fact that that is a traditionally speaking faster car, at least in their stock form. And although I definitely prefer the Porsche, for instance, because you're probably wondering why I would even compare it to that. Well, the reason is simple. Those are the two sedans that we've had in the game the most recently, and before that it was way back with the Tesla Model S. So in terms of recently, those are the two comparable cars. However, this one actually is more useful than the Porsche from a career mode, from a money earning point of view, from a value point of view. So even though I prefer the Porsche, I have no problem with admitting that this is a great car. And I'm looking forward to seeing the police car, safety car, whatever version of it as well, which will undoubtedly be pretty much the same as all of the safety cars have been, except it'll have a mileage point price instead of a credit price. And speaking of that credit price, this is one of the things that I've said a number of times on the channel, and doubtless I will bring it up again because it is such a valid point. This is one of the things that I love about Japanese cars. Asian cars in general, in fact, have one major thing in common with American performance cars, and that is bang for buck, value for money when it comes to performance. Because this thing is not that expensive, and it gives you a huge amount of range. And of course I'm not talking about fuel range, because that probably isn't that great given the 3.5 litre 309 horsepower engine, but what I am talking about is the class range, because although I haven't fully tuned mine in terms of the upper limit to see what it can do, in a straight line, that kind of thing, what I do know is that it's N300 stock. You can detune it to N200, which is incidentally what I'm using in this event against cars that are in higher classes and still beating them. But even more so than that, you can also drop the weight considerably on this car, and it's not all that heavy to begin with. 1,650 kilos is of course heavier than a hot hatch or a sports car, but that's a lot lighter, for instance, than a Charger Hellcat. It's a lot lighter than an equivalent Mercedes AMG would be, which is also up around 1.7 to 2 tons, so this is actually pretty modest as far as weight goes. But all of that doesn't mean that much, of course, unless it actually turns into great usable performance on the track. So what can this car actually do in a racing situation? Well, as I said, you can see here it's certainly competitive against the AI, but then again you can pretty much win with most cars against the AI under some circumstance or another, so that's not saying too much, but you can definitely feel that this car has huge potential. And again, something that I referenced in my overarching review definitely still applies here, and that is that this car gives me major Toyota Chaser vibes. In particular, the Tom's X540 Chaser from the past of the franchise, even as recently as GT6 in fact. It was, if I recall correctly, a 50 grand sedan, I think, but it was actually one of the best sedans in the game, and one of the fastest too. Everyone would always go for the obvious choices of the Lexus ISF, or the Mercedes C63, or the Chargers. That one though, it was just different to everything else. It was so much lighter on its feet, it would make a fantastic drift car. It almost felt like kind of a a race car, in a weird sort of way, like a touring car. That's what the handling felt like in the Chaser, and this definitely has similarities to it. Now, it's not as light and it's not as fast, but it certainly ain't slow. You can tune this up, the engine's got good potential, the power and torque are both decent, as I said, 309 horsepower, incidentally 277 pound-feet of torque, and it's 58 grand, so it's not even that expensive. Now, of course, you can get faster Japanese performance cars for a lower price, significantly faster ones through corners especially, but that's not really the point of a car like this. Of course, it's a larger luxury vehicle, but for what it is, it really can handle itself. And I know that a number of you guys are already aware of this because you're already building stuff like police cars and taxis and all that kind of stuff out of it, and it's obvious why you would want to. It is a brilliant car to work with. It definitely has sleeper appeal. It's certainly not a very well-known car in the West because they don't sell them here, and, you know, it's just got that kind of unique import vibe to it, but not a JDM import, more of a luxury Asian import, which you don't really talk about that much in Gran Turismo. It's not something that you see all that often, but at the same time, it clearly shows that just because Japan's making a bigger, heavier luxury car, that it can still perform like a sports car, because this definitely does. Now, to touch on the handling of the car for just a second, you can see a couple of times in the video that you can get the tail out, for sure, through certain corners, especially lower speed corners actually, when you start to put the power down, even in N200. So it's neutered and it's still spinning up those rear wheels. Of course it is on sports tyres, but still, that is something that you don't necessarily need to be cautious of, but I would actually say you should be aware of in a positive way, because I can instantly feel that even though I've set this up as a track car, it would make a fantastic drift car. And again, just like the Chaser, it's versatile, and that's one of the best things about cars like this. It's a sleeper, so people don't expect it to be as quick as it is. It's well priced, it's powerful straight off the bat, the class range is good, but also more importantly, it's competitive in those classes, at least against the AI, if not against real people as well. It's got great drift potential, excellent handling, especially for its size and weight, and the power is good. So in other words, across the board, even though I probably wouldn't classify this as like one of my favourite cars or something like that, or even one of my favourite sedans, it's definitely a car that I think was a good choice to add to the game. It's not a choice that I would have expected or even predicted anytime soon, but half of the joy of Gran Turismo is when cars like this do pop up. I believe that this is, alongside stuff like the Pantera and the McLaren P1 GTR and the Porsche Taycan, among the most significant cars, and of course recently the Roof CTR3, among the most significant debuts that we've had in Gran Turismo in some time, in fact. And I'm not just talking about GT Sport, because GT6 was good, but it carried a lot of cars over. There were some new ones, but a lot of them were already in GT5, and then a lot of those were already in GT4. So GT4 was really the last time for me where Gran Turismo had groundbreaking new cars. Chaparrals, Nikes, tank cars. But then for a while, it went a little bit quieter, a little bit more expected, with LMPs and Formula cars and DTM and rally cars of whatever type. This, to me, harkens back to the older days of Gran Turismo, almost like the kind of thing that you'd see randomly popping up in Gran Turismo 2 or Gran Turismo 4, and I think that's cool. So although I wouldn't say it's one of my favourites, as I said, it's certainly a very good car to have in the game. It's going to be a very useful one, a pretty popular one I think as well, and probably the safety car even more so. So shove your thoughts down below. Do you enjoy the car? Were you underwhelmed by it? Do you plan on using it a lot? Have you maybe not even bought it yet? As I said, tell me down below, and of course I will be doing tuning for it and the safety car when that one comes out next week as well. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.